What's one thing that you could do that would revoke your Kansas card? Like if you had a Kansas card, what would be the one thing that you could do that someone would be like, no, revoked?
I really like this question. I don't know that I have a good answer.
I don't think I have a good answer either. The only thing that I could come up with is if you didn't say, oops, sorry, or if you didn't like apologize immediately after doing something.
If you're driving in a town less than 5,000 people or you're driving the country and you pass a car and you don't give them the 2-finger wave.
You don't give them the wave.
Watch out.
I had a chemistry teacher in high school. He lived in Missouri when I was going to boarding school there, and he was from Colby. And so he did this whole thing where he's like, yeah, everyone in the Midwest, Kansas, up to Iowa, I did a test. In Kansas, I did the finger wave all the way up to Iowa. And the only people that didn't do the finger wave were everyone outside of Kansas. Everyone in Kansas did it, and everyone outside didn't. I was like, oh, okay, cool.
Yep.
And that was my introduction to
the 2-finger wave.
Well, to my chemistry teacher. Oh. That, and he announced to the class one day, he goes, what was it? He goes, I know the recipe for meth, but I'm not going to tell it to you. I was like, okay.
Very responsible. Was this, I guess that probably was before Breaking Bad, too.
Yeah, it was before Breaking Bad came out. He was also the soccer coach. He was really funny. Dr. Schmidt.
Dang. As far as other things that could revoke your Kansan card,
probably. Oh, I know one.
Okay.
If there is is it watch or warning that makes you go in the basement?
A warning.
Warning. If there's a tornado warning.
Oh, you just lost your card.
I know, I just lost my card. If there's a tornado warning and you immediately go in your basement. If you are not outside trying to figure out where it's at.
Depends on the Kansan. I think there's some truth to that. I mean, especially if it's like in the middle of the afternoon and it's a clear blue sky, except for out of the west. Like, I think most of us, no. Skylar says no. Okay, so
Skylar's in the basement.
Smart.
I'm in the basement before the warning.
Smart.
We've been really lucky in that since we've been living in our house in McPherson, and we have a split level house. We have a bi-level. So we don't have a full basement. We have half of a basement. So we still have windows. And we don't have any really like internal walls except if you under the stairs. That's our internal walls is the little crawl spaces under the stairs. But so we haven't had to hunker down or do anything weird.
We live in a split level house too, and
we live in an all level house.
There's several levels. Yes. But so we also don't have like a basement.
Oh, that's right, you don't.
Mm-hmm. And so that freaks Hannah out a lot. But we were out in Colby for the Picking on the Plains thing, and we were driving back and we saw the exit for Grinnell, and we're like, well, let's stop. So we stopped and saw the tornado damage there, and that kind of got us thinking again about, wonder what we should, if there's anything we could do to better protect ourselves. But
there's some new developments here in town, and they're all slab homes, which is fine. They're beautiful. And they do have a storm shelter, but they're in the garage. So if you're thinking about it, it's a 1-car garage. You have to back the car out, leave your car outside, get in the storm shelter, and then yeah.
When we were in Grinnell, like I didn't this is bad to say. Like we were driving through Grinnell, and then all of a sudden the trees stopped and the houses stopped, and it was like, oh, I didn't realize the tornado happened on the edge of town. And then no, the tornado didn't happen.
That's everything from in town that's now on the edge of town.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it was just the western side. And then once we started driving more in depth, you could see more. But it's when we're traveling either elsewhere in the States or overseas, and we say where we live, and if they know about tornadoes, they'll usually ask about tornadoes. I'm like, well, what I personally am a little bit less afraid now. I'm saying this on air, so it's probably
I'm
come
gonna call
back
you,
to
be
bite.
like,
But
"Hey, there's a tornado warning. Are you scared?"
I'm a less like most of the time you can see a tornado, and like when there's a tornado happening, the National Weather Service does a pretty good job of telling you where it is and where it's going.
Mm-hmm.
So that has lulled me into some semblance of safety. But
Yep.
Have you ever been storm chasing?
Oh yeah.
All right.
Yep. Well, my dad, I grew up storm chasing. So my dad used to be a ham radio operator
What was his call sign?
growing up. KB0YGL
Impressive.
was his, well, it was on his license plate. So as I grew up learning letters and stuff, I was like, that doesn't make any sense. But I remember it specifically because he had this like old, like silver blue pickup truck, and it was a bench seat, and he had a box. He made a box to put his radio in, and he didn't shave down the corners. So being the youngest, always stuck in the middle, I had to straddle that thing, and the corners of that box would dig into my legs. So this is why it's ingrained into my head.
Definitely.
So, but my dad would take us storm chasing with him all the time. I don't think my mother was involved in that decision because I don't think she would allow it. Because we were in some pretty dangerous spots. Like I remember him being out in a random field and lightning striking like literally 10, maybe 15 feet away.
Like the dirt moved and everything.
Yeah. And I was permanently underneath the dashboard at that point. And so, yeah, storms don't bother me anymore. There's
kind of two kinds of storm chasers in the world. There's people like our friend Tanner, like Henry Deal here locally. I assume like your dad who knew enough about the weather to.
They took all the classes. They have classes every year for storm chasers. And to try to eliminate the randos.
I will say I think calling it a class is a little bit of a stretch.
It is a little bit of a stretch. It's a presentation in a high school auditorium.
Yeah. Like this is an SLC, a scary looking cloud. Avoid it.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of increasingly. So there are people that really don't know anything about storms or about the area or about the roads. And they're out there and it makes it dangerous for everyone.
Yeah.
When those people are out chasing. I did a little bit of chasing. I am such a nerd. I was the president of the weather club at Kansas Wesleyan University.
The weather club. You didn't even have a cool name for it.
You know what was really sad? So I was kind of selected for this because I was the only other member of the weather club when Andrew Gable left Kansas Wesleyan after graduating.
That explains it.
Yeah.
That explains a lot.
Yeah.
Shout out to Andrew Gable.
Oh, yeah.
The weatherman of Salina.
Yeah. In whatever secret job he has now.
Yeah, he's a super secret job now, but
yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So I did go chasing a few times. I think I chased with Tanner once, maybe.
Yeah.
I have that in my memory, but yeah. If you watch Twisters, it's a little bit less crazy than Twisters makes it look.
It's very dramatized.
But I will say that
and it's not
storm
as quick.
chasers like Henry Deal, who's a legend here in Salina. Anytime there's a storm, he's on KSAL out there in the field reporting. He's a first responder, and when there's bad things happening, he'll respond to it and save people's lives. So it's important work.
Speaking of Twisters, it's one thing that I really have a problem with in that movie. It's like the weather moves like that. Like it is like, boom, tornado here, boom, tornado here, boom, tornado here. And I'm like, no, people, these tornadoes are not 15 minutes away from each other. Like they're usually like hours away from each other. And on the next day or something along those lines. And I'm like, ugh, that drove me so like people who understand how tornadoes work, that movie really irks them. But people who don't is like, that's the coolest movie ever. Granted, who's the main character? Who's the blondie?
Glenn Powell.
No. In Twisters? Is it Glenn Powell?
Are you talking about Twister or Twisters?
Twisters, the new one.
I'm pretty sure it's Glenn Powell.
That name just doesn't sound familiar.
I'm so sorry.
The dude that everyone has a crush on?
I think so. I'm losing confidence, but Skylar is giving me support.
It just
so
doesn't sound.
I'm pretty sure that's his name.
That's his name?
Yeah. He's a beautiful man. Mm-hmm.
He's a very beautiful man. But Glenn?
Glenn.
That makes never mind. I just lost all hope.
I will say,
man.
so if you're out there and you want to be a storm chaser someday,
don't be like
you know, of course you should study the weather. You should maybe get a amateur radio license, but you should also work on your ability to not pee.
Oh,
because if you find yourself in a vehicle as a storm chaser, you will go hours before you find another bathroom. Because they're not going to stop for you. They're not. Yeah.
You're going to perfect the bush wee, as Bluey would say.
The bush wee. I need to watch Bluey. I've heard lots of good things.
Madeline now calls it the bush wee. Like if she has to go to the bathroom on the side of the road or something, like if we're out in the middle of VFE, she goes, "Mom, gotta take a bush wee." I was like, "We're 5 minutes from a bathroom. We're gonna go to the bathroom." She loves peeing on the side of the road. I don't know why.
So our guest is Andrew Orr, Dr. Andrew Orr.
Dr. Andrew Orr. He is the professor of history and department chair and the director of the Institute for Military History at K-State University. In Manhattan. So he, you'll see a trend where a lot of our guests are also coming into town to talk at the Smoky Hill Museum. And so we saw that he was coming and we're like, hey, that would be a cool guest to have on because it's such a specific topic, military history, and his expertise, or I'll just read this little blurb here, is Andrew Orr is a global military historian of the modern era. He received his BA from Claremont McKenna College and his master's and PhD from the University of Notre Dame, however you want to say it. Notre Dame.
That's how we say it here in the States.
His work focuses on the 19th and 21st centuries and explores identity and conflict, civil-military relations, gender and conflict, and the politics of war with an emphasis on French and the United States. There's more here. He's written multiple books, multiple papers about the French military. One of them is Facing the Victorious Turks, How the French Misread the Turkish War of Independence. He's also written The Gay Girl in Damascus Hoax, Syria. Progressive Orientalism and the Arab Spring. Women in the French Army during the World War. So he's done a lot. There's more here.
I think the main thing I want to tell our audience, hopefully before they've tuned out.
Sorry, I wrote
No, that wasn't my insinuation. I'm sorry if that wasn't what I was trying to say.
Just giving you a hard time.
If you don't think military history is for you, this guest is for you.
Yes.
That was what made this guest really special. Andrew did a great job of. I don't think either of us are particularly passionate about military history, but I'd say I'm more interested now. And it wasn't just about guns and bombs. It was about people too.
Yeah. So without any further ado, here's our interview with Dr. Orr. Hello.
Hi, how are you? Feel free to put that wherever. Yeah. Yeah.
How's it going?
Hi.
Going on. How are you two?
Good.
Well.
Thanks for
I'm
coming in.
Gus.
Andrew, good to meet you.
I'm Sydney. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Have a seat. We'll get this microphone kind of pulled over. And something like that.
Is that good?
Yeah, it works great.
Right there.
Awesome.
Yeah, well, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be in Salina.
Yeah. Have you been in Salina before?
I have. Visited the college here and come here to go shopping sometimes.
Great.
Oh, sorry.
No,
I'm
it's
gonna
fine.
hop in.
Yeah, please.
You probably have questions,
Oh,
but
I have tons of
are you
questions.
are you from Kansas originally?
No, I'm originally from a town called Marysville, but a different one
Okay.
from the one you guys have. Marysville, California.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Gold Rush town in
Yep.
Northern California.
Wow. Wow.
So-
And then you went to, I have your Claremont McKenna. Where is that at?
It's in Los Angeles County, right
Okay.
up against the San Bernardino County border.
Okay.
Gotcha. Wow.
So what brought you to Kansas?
Kansas State.
Kansas State?
They
Okay.
brought me to Kansas. It's a professorships are a national market.
Yeah.
So I've been teaching down in Texas and saw a job ad for a spot at K-State, and
Mm-hmm.
my wife and I decided we might like it better at K-State than where we were.
Okay. How long have you been here?
12 years now.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Okay.
In August, it'll be 12.
What do you think of Kansas?
We really like it here.
Good.
My mother-in-law moved here yesterday. She liked it
Oh,
so much.
wow.
Literally, 3:08 p.m. Yesterday, she arrived as a resident of Kansas.
Wow. Well, tell her welcome. Yeah, we're excited to have her. So you obviously have a lot of interest in military history. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got interested in military history?
I'm not entirely sure. I mean, there were pieces of it that always kind of interested me. I remember watching the Civil War documentary when I was a child and being really fascinated by the stories. I've always liked history. I used to read history books in elementary school when they let us pick from the library. I probably should have spent some more time reading choose your own adventure novels and Dan Frontier's stories. But I remember reading The Battle of Midway in the 4th grade off the shelf, and I remember liking a Napoleon television series, miniseries that I watched, but sort of stayed interested in history. Majored, as one of my college majors, but I decided I wanted to be a historian, but I wasn't actually thinking of military history. Originally, I was interested in politics.
Oh, okay.
And the kind of got interested in French history, and I thought I was going to be a historian of French conservatism. But I wanted to write a dissertation about this really fascinating guy named Georges Mondel, French Jewish man, and at a time where most of the French right was anti-Semitic, who ended up being the leader of the Catholic list, as in the city of Bordeaux in the 1920s 24 elections. But his papers had vanished.
Oh.
So I planned it. I went to Notre Dame because I wanted to work with Tom Kesselman, who is an expert on Catholic-Jewish relations in France in that period. And Georges Mondel's papers had vanished. They were gone. And everyone assumed that the Nazis had taken and destroyed them. Because he was an anti-Nazi politician. He was the first guy to try and start the resistance against the Nazis. He spent most of the war in a concentration camp, then was murdered by the collaborationists right before Paris was liberated. So I had to kind of look for something else. Luckily for me, his partner's apartment, and hadn't been flipped, because about 7 or 8 years ago, someone flipped her old apartment and found all of his papers hidden in the walls. So if someone had done that in the 80s instead of the mid-2010s, I wouldn't be a military historian. I'd have been working on Catholic-Jewish relations in modern France. Instead,
That's
I needed
wild.
something different, and got interested in basically the French way of war and how it failed, and ended up following some different paths because no one had bothered gutting her apartment.
That's wild.
Yeah. So I have a little bit from your bio here that just talks a little bit about your specialities. So I'm going to say, so your military history expertise focuses on the 19th to 21st century, 21st, not 4th, 21st centuries, and explores identity and conflict, civil military relations, gender and conflict, and the politics of war with an emphasis on France and the United States. So, there's a lot of those things that are very interesting to me, but one that I'd love to hear more about is, how did you come to focus on war and gender in your body of work?
The archive led me to it. When I went to do my dissertation research, I was looking at civil military relations, how the politics of governments shaped defense policy. But going through it, I was using a bunch of papers that had been captured by the Nazis and then captured by the Soviets and returned to France in the 90s, during that now brief period when the West was getting along with Russia. We thought that was going to go better than it turned out, especially in retrospect. But they were poorly cataloged, so you just sort of had to open a box that might contain what you want and flip through it and see what you found. I saw this document titled The Abuse of Female Civil Employees. And, my first thought was, what in God's name were they doing to those people?
Yeah. Naturally.
So I said, all right, well, let's read it. Started reading it. Turned out to be radically different than I thought. I thought it was about the mistreatment of women working for the Army. It turned out by abuse, they meant officers abusing their discretion to hire women. And the report was an attack on generals who hired too many women and to be civilian employees of the Army. It included 2 Allied reports about abusing the right to buy typewriters and abusing the right to buy cars to aid in government service. That basically they were spending too much money on things designed to save male labor, like cars, typewriters, and women as employees. And that became because I've opened up a whole new section in my research where it's like, all right, what did it mean to be a woman working for the Army during and after World War I? And how did officers think of these women? How did they fit into the world of being military? Because the French Army banned women all the way up until about a month before the fall of France in 1940. Even though the U.S. military, the British, the Russians all took women as soldiers in World War I. Only the Russians let them fight on the front lines. But almost everybody else let women serve. There are lots of women from Kansas who serve in World War I in the American military. The French didn't. And so these civilian employees, we knew almost nothing about them. The best work thought there were only a couple hundred who survived after World War I still working. And as I dug into this, turns out there were tens of thousands. We thought there were like 180 or something in the 1920s. It turns out there were thousands at any given moment, tens of thousands over time, because most people only work for the Army for a couple of years.
Right.
And so that became a section in my dissertation. And at the end of writing it, when I needed to write a book, I said, the people who read it say the most original stuff is these women's stories. So instead of a third of a chapter, what if I just made the whole book about them? Which needed a whole bunch of research. It was probably not the most efficient decision I could have made for my own time. Because it meant that, instead of using 200 pages of my dissertation to write a 200-page book, I used like 20 to write a 200-page book. So, inefficient. But it started an entire line of my research where I dug into this. I found their lives, their stories, able to connect them to how the Army thought about them, why these specific women got and kept these jobs. And a lot of it had to do with their family. A lot of them were widows. Widows of men who died in World War I, children of men who died in World War I, or the mothers of men who died in World War I. And the Army viewed them as having a kind of blood tie to their organization. They were skeptical of civilians more generally, but especially in the early 1920s, they were hiring the family members of their own units dead.
Wow.
And so these civilians we're not sure of, but these are our civilians. These are our women. These are our survivors. And the social safety system wasn't very good for people who depended on the wages of men who had died in the war. And if the Army hired you, you had a job and an apartment you could afford and food you could eat. And your child, who might have lost his or her father in the war, had a future.
I noticed that you wrote a book about military identity. I'm curious kind of what that means. Is that what you were just referring to? Is that military identity?
That's a part of it. Because when I talk about military identity, what I'm basically saying is, what does it mean to be a soldier? What does it mean to be part of the military? Because much like being a Kansan, that can mean different things to different people in different contexts. And there are different ways to be a Kansan. You can be born a Kansan. And you could live here and move, and move to Illinois, but for the rest of your life, you think of yourself as a Kansan. And that's a little different than people like me who move to Kansas and come to think of ourselves as Kansans because it's where we live and where our lives are. And all of those are different versions of being a Kansan. And there are people who come and they live in Kansas, like, well, I'm a Kansan, but I'm going to leave here in a couple of years and I'm going to stop being a Kansan. And the military is a lot like that. There were people who were born into families that were military. 3-4 generations of soldiers, and their mother was the daughter of a soldier. And there are people who were conscripts and volunteers. And so one of the things I study is, what are the things that make you seen as, think of yourself as part of a military? What are those traits? Because we sometimes think they're obvious, but they're different in different times and different places. Militaries define themselves socially, and they have markers that do it, and they have a sense of their own values. But no two armies define themselves the same way. Our army doesn't define itself the way it used to. Today the army tries to, the Army, the Air Force, the Marines, everyone tries to get their soldiers, their airmen to vote because it's part of being a citizen. Dwight Eisenhower would have been horrified by this when he was a young officer because it was an article of faith amongst the U.S. Army that soldiers should not vote.
I didn't know that.
Before World War I.
Really?
Because that made you part of politics. And the Army should stand outside of politics so that politics did not corrupt the Army and so that the Army did not try and control the Republic.
Wow.
And so it was assumed that a good officer would not register to vote in the 19-teens because that would make him part of politics. And politics needed to be separate from the business of soldiering.
To me, that's like, I want to at least vote for my boss.
But the French army banned soldiers from voting until 1944.
Wow.
Women and soldiers got the vote from the same decree in France after the liberation of Paris. You couldn't vote in France as a woman until 1945, nor could you, 1944, nor could you as a soldier. Charles de Gaulle, the leader of the resistance against Germany, had never voted in his life because he was a career officer.
Wow.
the first time he voted was in the liberation elections.
I need to research more French history.
I think we all do, probably.
It's a little disturbing.
Oh, okay, good to know.
Yeah, I recently visited France just a few weeks ago, and
yeah, that's right, you were there.
I would agree that it is rather disturbing. There's a lot of dark periods, and
there are. And World War II was a particularly bad version of that for the French.
Well, it's fitting that they would name their airport after Charles de Gaulle.
You know? Yeah. He is one of the great men of French history. He had some issues too.
I'm sure.
But he left France better than he found it a couple of times.
When you're doing all this research, is it all archival, or are you doing interviews with people as well?
Different projects, I have to research differently. For most of my work, it's all archival because everybody I was researching was dead.
That's fair.
That World War, working on women who work for the army in World War I. Well, even if you're 16 when you do it, it means you're born about 1902. And so I started my research in 2004. You could try and find and centenarian and who is willing to talk to you and remember something, and whose contact information is on the internet at the time, but there was almost no one. There was almost no one left. I did another book on that's kind of in my more recent work on Gay Girl in Damascus blog. That was a very different research process. That was finding digital copies of things and media records and interviews and documentary films that had been made that interviewed participants. So that was a radically different kind of research experience. But most of my work on the French army, it's all interwar stuff where there's really early interwar stuff where there's no one who left alive who was old enough to have been a meaningful participant when I did the research.
Okay.
So I guess kind of building off of that, your primary sources are typically communicating to you through text or through some historical document. If you could travel back in time and witness 1 hour of any given conflict, where and when would that be, and why?
1 hour of a conflict. That's interesting. Not part of my research, but I'm always interested, as a historian, I'm interested in the beginning and the end of things, right? We're obsessed with beginnings and ends. And I would go back to May of 1453 and see the moment and the Ottoman army forces its way through the Theodosian walls and brings down the last real piece of the Roman Empire when they destroy the Byzantines and take Constantinople. I would see the last stand of the Byzantine Emperor.
I definitely wouldn't have
when Constantine in Philiogos tries to hold that breach in the wall himself.
Wow. That was a great answer. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back. This episode is sponsored by Renaissance Cafe. Serving Northern Italian cuisine prepared with a fresh, contemporary influence, the Renaissance Cafe is one of Kansas's favorite restaurants. Whether you're planning a romantic dinner date, a family celebration, or an intimate meal with friends, the Renaissance provides a unique dining experience with an old-world atmosphere. Open Thursday through Saturday evenings, the Renaissance Cafe is located just south of Salina in Assyria, Kansas. Visit renaissancecafeassyria.com to book your reservation today. So we're back, and I want to kind of shift gears a little bit and ask you about something that often makes, well, maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like sometimes makes historians uncomfortable, and that's the present and the future. Just because obviously we can maybe learn more from the history than we can sometimes about what's coming. We don't know. So it seems obvious that modern warfare is going through a sudden upheaval of technological development, from space-based weaponry that's becoming less science fiction and more reality, to $800 drones that can destroy aircraft worth billions.
Mm-hmm.
And now AI is starting to show up, and further developments loom on the horizon. Would you say, in your opinion, that this is a unique moment in the history of warfare?
It's not. There have been a lot of other moments where you have dramatic change and a huge amount of uncertainty. That's a lot more normal than people in the present often think that it is. And it's hard even to tell right now where this is going, because what we're seeing, especially in drone war right now, is we're seeing the first people using it, the early adopters. And that makes it really hard to figure out how central this is going to be. Because right now, in the now, looking about the last 5 years, from the Second Azeri-Armenian War, where you had the first moments where drones became decisive weapons. The Azeris had them, the Armenians didn't. The Armenians had what seemed like powerful defensive positions. I know it's not the most famous war ever, but it's actually really important. And the Azeris had the tech, and suddenly Azeri armed drones are firing munitions all over the place, and the Armenians have no defense, and they collapse. Nagorno-Karabakh largely goes back to Azeri control. That and Ukraine, where the Ukrainians and the Russians have both made these everyday weapons of war. They started out as neat kit. Now the battle line, the no man's land between the trench lines are covered in fiber optic cable. Because at first the drones used Wi-Fi and radio signals, but then so you bring in jammers. Because if you cut off the signal, you can no longer control where the drone is going, and it becomes a sort of useless weapon. The counter to that are fiber optics. Tiny cables attached to the drones so that they can't be jammed, so that the controllers can drive them. That's not a new idea. The Navy's been doing it with torpedoes for decades. Tiny cables attached to torpedoes so American submariners could control, even like in the Cold War, where their Mark 48 ad caps could go. It's a decade-old thing for the Navy that the Ukrainian and Russian army started doing. And when they hit their target, they just leave this fiber optic cable trailing from where they go. So right now, you cannot fight modern war without a huge amount of drones. They let you see almost everything. They're the primary weapon for strike in a lot of places. They are really cheap precision. And if you talked about it in this moment, you'd say they may displace tanks. They may make tanks no longer the dominant weapon of land warfare, because they are so vulnerable to swarms of swarms of drones. But this isn't the first time we've had things that look like they themselves are a revolution in warfare that will change everything and will become the dominant arm. If you go back to the late 19th century, you had the advent of the modern torpedo. And it looked like small, fast-moving torpedo boats were going to be the future of naval warfare, because you could make them really cheap, and they could destroy a battleship that cost 100 times what or more what they cost, and these swarming little torpedo boats would make all of naval warfare obsolete. There was a whole school in France, the Jeune École, that thought that this is what modern warfare was going to be. They became famous enough that the Jeune École became sort of a catchphrase that later groups would latch onto, like the Old Guard of Napoleonic regulars, and the Old Guard versus the Jeune École, or the Young Turks, another term from about that time. Except there's a countermeasure to these fast-moving torpedo boats, destroyers, whose original name were torpedo boat destroyers. much smaller than battleships, but small, fast-moving ships with rapid-firing guns that could make mincemeat of a wave of motorboats with torpedoes. And when you started getting better optics that let you zero in on things, suddenly these torpedo boats become bit players, and the battleship rules World War I. And the battleship ruled World War II in Europe still. And the Pacific aircraft carriers do displace them in the end. But they were supposed to be useless too, because torpedo boats were supposed to sink all of the aircraft carriers. So it's not the first time we've had a cool new weapon that's supposed to change absolutely everything. The air power people said that precision strike aircraft would make tanks and artillery useless. But I seem to recall Eisenhower having an awful lot of tanks and artillery in his order of battle as he liberated France. So right now, every army has to figure out how they will defeat drones. If you are going to lead troops into battle and you do not have weapons and a strategy for how you will protect everything you've got against drone swarms, you're going to be defeated. You're going to fail in your operations. But there are ways that might work to defend these things. And if you can perfect that, suddenly a lot of things become doable again in modern warfare.
I was doing my undergrad in 2010 through 14, and it was right as we started hearing about quadcopters, before we started calling them drones. And I remember seeing a video from an MIT lab, I don't remember what it's called, where they were showing quadcopters like flying through like a slit like this big. And I remember thinking like, okay, this is the future. I don't really understand how or what the use case for this technology will be, but it's going to change everything. And I didn't really know what I was talking about. But it is crazy to have lived through the last 15 years and seen now how those things have kind of taken over everything.
When I was in middle school, this was like the cutting edge stuff from the first Gulf War. That the ability to guide something remotely through a window was like the amazing stuff you could only imagine the American military or something like it able to do. And now you can buy it at Walmart. I mean,
it's kind of terrifying.
And do it.
Okay, so now a few kind of soft questions. In your opinion, is war an inevitable phenomenon caused by some common failing of the human spirit? In other words, do you think war will be relegated to the history? Do you think war will ever be relegated to the history books, or is it here to stay as long as there's people on planet Earth?
That's a softball question.
Well, I guess
the
what I mean.
Metaphysical.
That's what I mean.
Nature.
It's not
what is human
nature? We're not
nature?
talking about hard things. We're talking about.
I'm supposed to say war is a human failing. I'm not necessarily sure it does reflect a human failing.
Sure.
I think often it reflects the importance and the stakes of issues, of how important certain things are to different groups of people, and scarcity. There's only so much of things. There's only so much land. There's only one group gaining power comes at the expense of another, and war reflects the scale of the scale at which power can be exercised. How that shapes human life. It shapes freedom. It shapes autonomy. One group's autonomy is often another group's subservience, and one group's security almost always comes at the expense of someone else's insecurity when you go to scale, when you start talking about groups of millions of people and states. So I do think we will eventually have a world without war, but not until we have a point where the human race is a single integrated community. Until we're at a point where Kansas and Katanga are part of one seamless community where you can leave Kansas and go to Katanga, which is southern Congo. Oh, I just picked it because it starts with K-A. Until people go back and forth and view each other as one, being part of one entity. Until then, human interests are going to have clashing governments, clashing polities, and mediation gets you so far, but there are some questions which are just so important that a group of people won't give way on, and another group of people also can't give way on. And that will lead to war, at least some of the time in some of the places.
I was having a chat with our producer, Skylar, earlier about the story, I'm sure you're familiar with it, of when the U.S. Army tried to develop a one-size-fits-all uniform. You know, they went around the country measuring everybody, came up with all of these averages, and then basically discovered that their uniform fit no one because averages aren't a good way to size uniforms. You know, as you look through military history, of course, you know, what often gets studied is the big picture, the demographics, how many people died, who won. What do we miss by not talking about individuals?
There are a bunch of different things that we miss. One is cost. Numbers give us a sense of the scale of pain people endure from war, but it doesn't actually show you the depth of that pain. It almost makes it numbing to some extent. We hear 250,000 dead, and that becomes a sort of wall to understanding. We just sort of recognize that's awful. But stories give us this, individual stories show us how much war or the military shape an individual human being's existence from beginning to end. And when you see the story of one family and somebody just vanishes from it, goes from being somebody who was supposed to be the future, the person who's going to take over the farm, the person who's going to be who's going to be there to make sure two generations, one younger, one older, are okay, and then they're gone, and there's a gap. That gap is often the most powerful thing that war leaves behind, because physical damage, it's bad, but it's fixable. If you can build the building, you can fix the building with enough time and resource. But those gaps can never actually be fixed. Like someone else can fill them, but that's another role that person's not doing, that they would have been doing. And it can have a multi-generational effect, good and ill, or constructive and damaging. In a soldier who goes off to fight, fight in World War II, and the Kansas National Guard ends up in the 35th Division, and well, when they don't make it back from the fighting in France, their story ends, and we don't know what that person would have done with the rest of their life. If being a war casualty doesn't mean you would have done something earth-shattering if you stayed, but they'd have done things and would have shaped hundreds of people's lives in big and small ways. If they had been here to do it, some of what they would have done, someone else steps into, but every family now has a gap. And people who remember, and some people will never be okay from that loss. And people's lives change, and they don't even know it. As every 20-year-old who doesn't make it back from Normandy most of them leave a bunch of people with different lives who never know it, because who might he have married? There's a woman in Kansas who married somebody different than she would have if she'd met him. And she doesn't regret that. She married someone she wanted to marry, but her life is transformed in ways she doesn't know. Literally. Maybe for good, maybe for ill. But it's fundamentally different than if she'd married this other man she would have met. And they'd have done something else with their life and maybe lived in a different town and interacted with different people. And her family is now different because they have different in-laws. And no one knows it. And somebody else, but there's somebody else who does know their life is different because their son's not coming back. And he had a job he was going to do for that family. We miss the depth of pain and how deeply our people's lives are shaped from conflict when we only look at the numbers. Because we can't draw the scale, and some ways we can't even really reconstruct it because there's so much we don't know about what would have happened. We just have space that's empty and connections we don't even know were never made.
That was beautiful.
That was amazing.
And challenging.
I got nothing.
Okay.
I love history and the fact that other people know history and I don't, because I love listening to it. I probably won't retain anything because I'm not a good person like that. But then, but like I love like learning. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay. But we do need to take a quick break real quick.
Sounds great.
And then we'll be right back. Want to spread your organization's message across Kansas? Consider becoming a sponsor. Ask A Kansan has a unique focus on Kansas and its people. By sponsoring our podcast, your organization can reach people from Canarado to Kansas City, Wichita to Washington, and all the great places in between. We have a variety of sponsorship packages available to fit your budget and needs. For more information, visit askakansan.com/sponsorships or call us at 785-571-9507.
Welcome back to Ask A Kansan, and I just have one question left. You were just talking about kind of the human cost of war. I have to admit that growing up in Kansas, I feel like I led a very sheltered, protected existence, and I think most Kansans do, thankfully. A year or two ago, I'm an alum of Kansas Wesleyan University, and I was walking through the campus and looked at Memorial Library, and I thought, wait, why is that called Memorial Library?
Mm-hmm.
And I asked some people, and they told me it's named after all of the coyotes that passed away fighting the wars.
Mm-hmm.
And that, that kind of shocked me. So my question for you is, Kansans, of course, have gone around the world to fight in various conflicts, but conflict hasn't come home to Kansas. As you reflect on the knowledge you've accumulated on military history, what would you want Kansans to know and take home with them about conflict and war?
First thing I'll say to make you feel a little better, the soldiers who died and sailors who died and had that library named after them, they would be so happy to hear that you felt you grew up safe and sheltered and that were remote enough from conflict that people begin to forget at what things are named after. They weren't fighting to be remembered. They weren't fighting so everyone would remember their names and their sacrifices. They were fighting so that their descendants would grow up safe and happy and have a chance to make their own lives in freedom. That's what they wanted. They wouldn't be unhappy to hear their sacrifice was remembered. But more than anything, they would be happy to hear that their descendants got what they were fighting to get for them. Because when war is an omnipresent part of civilian life, that's not good. That's a sign of bad things happening because war's happening in your town. you remind me about the actual question again?
Oh, yeah. I was just, as you reflect on the knowledge you have accumulated about military history, what would you want Kansans to know about conflict and war?
That because war is so hugely complex, it is so hard to predict and so dangerous.
Mm.
As the number of people who have thought that something in war would be simple or easy, or think that this should be fast. The answers are obvious. As war is a hugely dangerous thing, not just because it kills people, though it is dangerous because of that. But it is such a powerful and complicated force that when you unleash it, what you're going to get both on a battlefield and in a society is impossible to guess. As it's hugely creative, amazingly powerful in a generative sense. It makes culture, it makes science, it makes inventions, and it has knock-on effects which can be amazingly beneficial. But you also can never guess the myriad of ways it will be destructive and harmful and painful. And you can never guess what it's going to transform. The once you unleash it, you cannot imagine where it's going to go. Mm. Ask Vladimir Putin about the war, about the war in Ukraine, but ask any number of other people about, at the end of a war, would you have done this if you knew what was going to happen? And you just, and the answer is often, I would have been too afraid, even if it turns out to have had generally beneficial consequences for society. The scale of what it takes to win is always so much greater than what people think it's going to be. And the long-term effects are so much bigger from small wars than people guessed they would be.
When I was junior or senior in high school, we had a Vietnam vet come and visit our classroom. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't the most mature at that point in my life.
Were any of us?
High school students not mature? Shocking news.
This vet repeated the same phrase over and over again. And he did it with, incredible earnestness. And he just said, freedom is not free. Freedom is not free. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think as I look back on that time, I'm starting to understand more what he meant. Mm-hmm. I'm crying.
It's okay. I was crying while he was talking too.
Yeah.
It's the amount of passion that you bring to this and a new light that you shed that a lot of people don't get to see that side of. Mm-hmm. And so that's where our emotion comes from is honestly, we came in to this interview thinking, oh yeah, we're going to talk a lot about French war and French history and the U.S. history. But you bring you surprise us with how much passion and compassion that you have towards people and towards families and everyone. And so thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
It's important work you do. Very.
People become historians because on some level we love the past. And if you're going to be a professor of history, your whole life is going to be about the past. It's what you think about, what you write about, what you teach, what you lead people through. It can give you a kind of strange relationship to the rest of the world. Because to me, 1925, it's my today. I think about the 1920s every single day. I write about them. I teach them. They're sort of my decade because that's where the largest part of my work is centered in. And I'm almost there most of the time. I'm here today. I live my life. I worry about what's happening right now, but I also live in the 1920s. And the politicians from France in the 1920s are people that I almost sort of assume everybody is just knows about because, well, I mean, how do you not know Raymond Poincaré? He's really important. He's been president and prime minister, and Mitterrand. Well, he's kind of weird, but he's really cool. Well, I read about them in the newspaper pretty regularly. The same way that we read or hear about Donald Trump and Barack Obama and Joe Biden. It's like, well, how do you not know who Donald Trump is? Where have you been for your entire life if you don't recognize the name? And I do know who Donald Trump is, don't worry. Academics aren't that clueless. Yes. But the past is alive to us. And if you can't explain your today with passion, then what's wrong with you? And to me, the past is my today as much as today is my today.
I imagine I'm a big fan of Star Trek, and especially Star Trek The Next Generation, when Jean-Luc Picard routinely visits the holodeck, and he assumes other identities and visits the past in human history in a myriad of ways, just for exactly what you're talking about. And in the same way that you're talking about, just in your head rather than in some metaphysical space.
So. Absolutely. And when we think of Star Trek is a great example of this, because when Gene Roddenberry thought about the future and wanted to tell a story of it, to do that, to lay out his vision of what the human future would look like, he had to use the past in order to tell the story of the future. Because if he simply told the story of what America looked like in the 1960s, well, that's just telling today. He wanted us to imagine something distant enough from America in the late 60s that we could envision it, a world transformed. And so when he does it, he reaches the entirety of the original series is rooted in a series of layered stories of the past. Here in Kansas, we can recognize pretty clearly the West. Right? Star Trek, the original series, is set in the West, but in space. A frontier to be discovered, to be settled, to be made productive, that humanity is expanding into. When they visit these tiny frontier space colonies, they're visiting Enterprise, Kansas, but in space. And that's what they're doing. When you're looking at star bases, a star base is Fort Riley in space. That's what it is. As that, that's part of the story that they're telling. The Enterprise is like the cavalry patrolling Western Kansas. Yes, but it's also the 18th century Royal Navy in space. That's the Federation and fleet. These isolated ships out patrolling the British Empire and its frontier. Captain Kirk is Horatio Hornblower, Royal Navy officer of the Napoleonic era, that's the literary character who's rooted in that time. But he's telling those overlapping stories of the past in order to give us a vision of what the future looks like. You have to envision the future. You have to draw on images from your past in order to create distance from the present, because you can't create future distance. It's metaphysically impossible. The only way to make people feel distant from the present is to reach into the past enough to find a story that you can then turn into science fiction to see the future going on.
Well, I think that's a great place to wrap things up. I'm so thrilled that I found another Trekkie, by the way.
Yeah, it doesn't happen very often.
Thank you so much for your time today. This was really a pleasure.
Thank you for inviting me here. I work for Kansas State. We're a public university. We like to say we're the university for Kansans, although that's sort of partisan, and so maybe I shouldn't say that in public. But we literally exist to share knowledge. Hoarding knowledge does not help our university one bit. Our mission is to spread knowledge in Kansas. So I think of this as the happiest part of my job.
Awesome.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have you heard people in your organization say, we need video? At Feely Creative, we develop videos to drive your marketing strategy. We are problem solvers, crafting messaging and visuals to achieve business goals. Whether you need to share your organization's identity, convey company culture, attract the right people to your team, or put your products on display, Feely will help you communicate effectively and get back to what you do best. Let's get creative. Feely Creative.
Thanks for joining us for that conversation. As we mentioned in our intro, we thought we were coming into that conversation with a very different intent than what it was. His passion, his compassion, his way of just, answering questions that make you really think, oh my gosh, I've never even thought of it that way before. Mm-hmm. That's what struck me the most out of this whole conversation.
The moment when I was talking about the Memorial Library at Kansas Wesleyan, and he said that that the people that gave their lives and service of our country and are memorialized by that library would be happy that I didn't remember it or remember them, or that I had to dig for that. I hadn't considered that before, and that was challenging and has stuck with me in the last couple of days.
Yeah. So I look forward to those. Like, these are the conversations that just blow us out of the water because we don't expect them. And that's what makes them interesting and fun. So
I think, like, if there's one, what are we, 10 episodes in, something like that? To the podcast?
10 or 11.
Yeah. And, full disclosure, we've had a couple podcasts prior, and they were great. They were very different in format and function.
Yeah.
But I would say I'm reminded again that every person has a story. Every person is unique and different. And when you give them a chance to tell that story, be ready for a wild ride. It may not go where you expect it to, but it will be interesting. You can guarantee that. And to
bring kind of things full circle, to remind our listeners or viewers, if you're watching, we have 2 full-time jobs here at Feely Creative. That's why we are dressed vastly different today. Gus has been out filming all day in the heat, and I have client meetings today. So our attire is very different. But what that means is that at Feely, we're fulfilling our mission, which is to fight for the good in the world by telling stories that matter. And this is just one of those stories that really fulfills that mission without us even trying to.
Oh, yeah. That's great. And I think, we are working to build an audience, a group of people that are open to hearing each other's stories. Mm-hmm. Doesn't mean you have to agree with everything that's said. You don't have to change your whole worldview just because somebody on the podcast has a different worldview from you. But I hope that you'll be open to being curious about it, that you'll be open to whatever stories that we share. It's just a window into another perspective on this state and what it means to live here.
Yeah. Very well said. Okay. You ready for the fun stuff?
I'm ready for the fun stuff.
All right. So here's for the fun stuff. Okay. So Gus, I have been following, we talked about this a couple episodes ago, but the 2 guys that are walking across Kansas. Mm-hmm. So they've made it halfway. They're on day 11. I think today is day 12. They haven't posted yet today. But I wanted to play you this TikTok because it kind of affirms everything that we've been talking about on this podcast. And these are two guys from California that started in Delaware, have made it through all the states between Kansas and Delaware. And this is their kind of summary of Kansas. Hopefully I'm describing the right one.
After seeing half of it.
Yeah, after only seeing half of it.
It is day 10 of walking across Kansas, and contrary to what many people have told us, it has been really beautiful so far in kind of an unexpected way. Back home where we're from in California, it's more like you got to get to the tallest hill or the tallest mountain in town just to see a couple miles in front of you, just to get those types of views. But here in Kansas, I mean, off to my side, not even the craziest example, but you can see miles and miles in just about any direction. Like, it's wild. We're on just about the same elevation as everything else, yet you can see so far, and it's really just been beautiful.
Look at the sky, how blue it is. When there's no clouds in the sky. And even when there are clouds, the clouds are just so much more defined and beautiful. And then at night when the sun's going down, I don't know if it's because it's flatter or what, but the sunsets are so much prettier here in Kansas late afternoon. And I mean, people say Western Kansas might get a little more dull, but we don't mind. We've been blessed with what we've been able to see thus far. And Kansas, we're almost done with you. We're gonna kill this state, and then we're going on to Colorado. Let's go.
There's a lot to talk about.
There's a lot to talk about there. And it makes me want to tear up a little bit because it's the same. Like, we interview all these people and we're like, yeah, what's your favorite thing? And everyone goes, oh, the sunsets, or hey, Kansas really isn't that flat, or hey, Kansas is beautiful even though it's flat, and all these things. And yeah, it kind of affirms just everything that we've been talking about. And this is their first experience.
It's awesome. As a person who spends too much time on his phone, I'm always impressed by people that are out there experiencing life. They're out there doing things. It's clear to me from what they said that they haven't just been looking at their phone as they've been walking. Their eyes have been up. They've been looking at the horizon. They've seen the sunset. They've seen those things, and they've cherished them, just as those of us that are privileged to have grown up here have learned to cherish as well.
Now, the other thing that we have learned to cherish is the Kansas weather.
Oh.
So, Merlin, go ahead and play 11. Same guys.
So this
different
is the
attitude.
next day?
This is the next day.
These poor guys.
Kansas, what is with your weather? It said it was gonna be 80 degrees and sunny. Now we're getting rained on and hail is hitting us. Like little pieces of ice. I don't think we've seen hail since we were maybe 6 years old. Also, how is there hail? It's like 80 degrees right now. How can there be ice? I don't understand. Also, there's thunder going on, even though there's blue skies to my side. Like, where is this thunder coming from? I haven't seen any strikes of lightning.
The weather app is a lie.
The weather.
Don't trust it.
Do not trust the weather app. I swear it's just a dude with a thermometer putting in his best guess every day. Like, this is unreal right now. But we are pushing through, getting hit with blocks of ice. You know, that's just life in Kansas, I guess, and that's life on the road. So we're pushing, and we're going to get through this day.
I like how he keeps referring to it as ice and not hail.
Yeah. Wow. There was a map somebody shared with me not too long ago that showed the National Weather Service's like their confidence in each part of the country, like how far out their forecasts are good, basically.
Oh, interesting.
And Kansas in the Midwest, there's a range of states there that's about 2 days. They feel like their forecasts are good about 2 days. Whereas
that checks out.
And it's like, I want to say 45% accuracy or something.
Yeah. Because
South Florida, it's like 7 or 8 days. And it's like, I mean, they can almost get it like within a degree because it's so consistent, but not out here.
That is so funny. So I do want to read you a couple comments from those videos.
Are the Kansans showing up in these comments like we want them to?
They are. Good. They're showing up, and this is
way to go, people.
From a Kansan, the one that I knew immediately when I read it. Oh, they did. Oh, it's raining. They did post today. We'll look at that later. Oh, where'd it go? Where'd it go? Okay, I can't find it, but I think I can remember it. It's anyone can fall in love with the mountains, but someone who has a soul falls in love with Kansas, or falls in love with the prairie. That's what it was.
Yeah. I hope all of our listeners have had a chance to just go walk in a prairie, especially one that has a lot of. It's not just a field. There's a difference between a field and a prairie. A field is okay. I'm turning into.
That's fine. Go on. This is what you're
we've
known
had
for.
the privilege of working with the Land Institute here in Salina, making some videos for them, and they're concerned a lot with agriculture, and we work with a variety of different ag clients. But one of the things that the Land Institute cares about is perennial crops, developing crops that come back every year, as well as kind of looking at how polyculture can work. Most of the food and crops grown are grown in monocultures where it's just one plant. But and so like a field is if you're imagining a field right now, you're probably imagining a monoculture, a field filled with wheat or a cornfield. But the prairie, the natural grassland that once occupied the space where we are right now, was not filled with single species. It was a complex, diverse, ecosystem. And when you look at the plants that grow in those ecosystems, they're crazy. In fact, this is the perfect time for me to shift to the background. This piece here, we'll see if we can't get
We'll get a picture of it and post it.
This is a crop that's being developed at the Land Institute that is basically, it's trying to create crops that we can grow that mimic the prairie.
Yep.
That have the strength and the vitality of the prairie while also doing things that we need as humans. And what's awesome about them is their root systems. This is not to scale. This is actually really small. Those roots are like 10 feet, 15 feet deep. And the roots of a lot of plants that we grow are not that deep. And so they don't hold on to moisture as well. And so moisture is lost. Yeah. But so the prairie is just a great place to go out and until you're in the prairie, you don't realize just how diverse it is, how much life there is in every square centimeter of that space. So get out there and walk. Kansa Prairie, if you're on the eastern half of the state, is a great place. We'll have to look at some other places.
The other ones are, it's in, is it Stock City? I take Madeline all the time.
In the central part of the state, there's the Tallgrass National Prairie.
That's the one I'm thinking of.
Which is also really wonderful.
Yes, that one has tons of really good hikes. There's one that I take Madeline to every year. It's only 3 miles. You get across the creek, so you have to take your shoes off, and you get to swim with the tadpoles and all that jazz. So here's my guilty pleasure. And it just started last year, is I love, and I call them ditch flowers, and they're really not ditch flowers, but I love going into the middle of BFE and just driving all the dirt roads and finding random wildflowers and creating bouquets and stuff out of them. It's a lot of fun during the fall. The fall, you get a lot of different ones. This is my first summer that I'm trying to do it, but you'll see me bring a lot of random, flowers
That's awesome.
into the office and stuff. So if you see a random lady on the side of the road
watching
with scissors,
her kid pee,
watching her kid pee, and getting down into the ditch and cutting flowers, that's me. Just wave and ignore it.
You've said several times BFE. What? I don't know what that means.
I'll let you Google it because the middle letter.
Okay, well I can imagine.
So it's bum F everywhere is really what it is, or you could do nowhere.
Okay, so it's like out in the middle, kind of.
Out in the middle of anywhere.
Okay, good. I just wanted to make sure I was understanding.
Yeah, sorry. I think that might be one of those terms that your parents tell you growing up, but it's not known anywhere else.
I'm going to do the Skylar test. Skylar, have you ever heard of this term?
Not as an No.
as an acronym. Oh, but you have heard of the
Yeah.
okay. This is the first time I've ever heard.
Here's my okay. So I'm gonna go. These are the cookie crumbs that I follow, because that's the way the cookie crumbles. So this is so Devin, our executive producer here at Feely, he has a sister Daly who I used to cheer with, and so I got to know her really well in middle school and high school, and she told us a story one time of how she used to say, and now I'm thinking of the story and it's not very appropriate, but I'll try to
Write it in, Sydney.
write it in. But she used to say DA a lot, like, oh, that guy is such a DA. And I'm going to let you guys figure out what you think DA means. But none of us knew like a person that is not very knowledgeable. They might be stupid, for the lack of better words.
Okay.
That person is so stupid, or that person is that's what it kind of means. But she said that one day, and they're like, oh, that guy's such a DA. And we're like, what does that mean? She goes, and she said it, and she goes, my dad says it all the time. And we're like, that's not a thing. So that's why I'm like, are there other things that people, like their parents make up and they start saying them, and then they realize, oh, that's not an actual thing. That's just something my parents made up. Anyway.
There was a moment, another one of our coworkers, Tim, and I were at a convention in Indianapolis, and we were going to do an activity there. We were going to pilot a starship. It was really cool. And there was some miscommunication about
who was going to be the pilot of the
well,
starship?
no, about how much time we had or something. And so I felt like I'd kind of been cheated. And so I was kind of talking to Tim. I didn't think anybody else was listening, and I used the word gypped. And what I didn't realize is the person behind the desk came from a gypsy background and was horribly offended. And I try really hard to not use that word anymore, just because I think language does matter.
I never put two and two together.
Yeah.
I did not know that's where that term came from. Or is it?
Well, I believe it is, yeah. And so I try to not say that, and I think I don't necessarily think that we have to live our lives in like really strict rules.
Yeah, but
I do think it's important, like to if somebody tells you something like that, listen to them and think about it when you use that word again, because I sure do. I think about it a lot, actually.
Dang, yeah. I didn't even put two and two together.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
Now I know. All right, we got way off topic. I do have one more thing.
Okay, I have a small thing too.
Can you bring up the map? Well, or that. Sorry, I worked really hard on this map, so I'm gonna make you watch it.
Ooh.
So this is the where they've gone in their Kansas journey. Sorry, back to living in these guys. I probably should learn their names, but I don't. Okay, go ahead and play it. There's no sound. So they went from Lewisburg, and then they went to Ottawa, and then Osage, and then back down to Allen in Franklin County, Council Grove.
Oh yeah, they're seeing some
Elmo, Kansas, wherever that is.
That's really close.
Assyria, and then Ellsworth.
Wow.
So that's where they're at right now. That's their little line.
Good for them.
Yeah. So we'll just keep an eye on that, just because it's, I don't know, curious.
My brother-in-law was not born in the U.S. And spent time all over the world. And when he first started dating my sister, he came here and worked for my dad in my dad's business, and he had to go way out to Western Kansas for business. And he's told this story several times to me of like, being a person who grew up in cities, in far off places, and then finding himself in Western Kansas with this massive sky. And he just describes like, not quite a panic attack, but just this like kind of overwhelming sense of how big the sky was. It's interesting to me.
Do you think that's why there's a lot of astronauts from Kansas?
Yes, I do. Have I done my whole spiel about that? I think I have.
I think you have.
Yeah.
And I think that's why it was at top of mind because I probably re-listened to a podcast.
If you missed that episode, I'll share it again. I have this theory that Kansans look up, that we spend a lot of time looking at the sky, the stars, the weather. And it moves me deeply that our state, the monument on top of our state house is of a Native American person looking up, because I think that's what we do best is we look up. And yeah, I think there's a lot of kids that grow up here and they see the sky and they are filled with wonder and they're filled with like, what can I do to make this world a better place? And then they go off and do that. And yeah, for some people, they take that very literally and they go off and they become an astronaut. That's really cool. Actually, did you know there's an astronaut who just recently came back from the International Space Station?
Oh, really?
Astronaut Nick Hague from Hoxie.
Oh, I think I did know that.
Yeah. I think a few episodes ago, you asked me to name like who would be top of list for me to get on the podcast. Nick Hague would be an awesome person to have on. And even better if he ever goes up again, if we could do a brief interview with somebody on the International Space Station, that would be awesome.
All right, NASA or SpaceX, whatever we're calling it these days.
Yep.
We need a link. We need to link up.
Can I show you? I just have a funny video.
Yeah,
It's not.
show me your funny video.
It's, if you didn't already catch on, this week is kind of a crazy week for us. We're in the middle of producing a feature-length film about a festival here in Salina called the Smoky Hill River Festival. And so I'm kind of delirious. Even now, I'm kind of delirious. So
that's why the conversation's been so good.
Oh yeah. I need to always be a little more. Anyway, so yeah, I was sitting with my two dogs last night, and I had seen a video like this, so I decided to try it. Would you guys want to go?
Oh.
Would you guys maybe want to go for a walk? Would you maybe want to go for a walk?
Using all their favorite words.
Yeah. It was just.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny.
As a dog owner and lover, I had to share that. You can cut it in the edit if you don't like.
No, I love it. It's a good transition to whatever I'm about to show you that I can't remember. All right, last one. Okay, so this is just kind of a fun, feel good, very Kansas thing to do. Mainly because I like the interview portion of this video. It's a newscast, so I'll let Merlin play it.
You never know where a message of love will show up, like in this case in a massive wheat field in Kansas. One farmer spent months planning and creating a heartfelt anniversary message for his wife. Jesse Blasi has been a wheat farmer for more than 20 years, and the only thing he says that he loves more than farming is his wife and family. So for their 20th anniversary, he wanted to use his farming expertise to create a work of agricultural art to symbolize that love. Out in his field, he carved out the words Jesse and Sarah 20 years, then took his wife up in a plane so she could see that special gift.
I knew it'd make her smile, and that was kind of the whole goal, was to get that little grin out of her that I like.
That's Jesse Blasi love. That's farmer love.
And even though I'm the farmer, she grows our best crop. Like, we got two girls, Reagan and Avery, and they are our best crop.
Well, Jesse began planning this surprise back in October when he planted the field with more than 60.
So I just love that he referred to his kids as crops. And it's a very farmer thing to do. But I thought that was real sweet. Just a little real sweet.
If you don't have a lot of farmers in your life, that may sound like a derogatory.
But it's really meant like.
Not at all.
Not at all. Like.
Yeah.
It's just.
What a touching thing to do.
Yeah, I thought it was real cute.
Yeah. There's a similar story a year or two ago that one of our next guests on the podcast reported on, and it actually went national.
Yeah.
So yeah, our friend Abby Ray is going to be joining us here in a few weeks, I think. And I'm excited to talk to Abby about moments like this that are happening in our state.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, thank you for joining us today. Thanks for hanging on if you've lasted this long through all of our rambles and cookie crumbs. But make sure to like, share. We're on all your platforms. If you're on all the platforms, not everyone is. I don't blame you. There's a lot. TikTok, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube page, like and follow us on Facebook, Instagram. What else are we on? LinkedIn.
I'm impressed.
All the things.
Yeah, you've got lots. It's
Lots
awesome.
of things. We have a website built by yours truly, so just be kind.
And it has a very unique feature that I think is really cool.
Yeah. So the new feature is if you go to our episode map, there's a map, and if you hover, it's easier to do this on your laptop or your computer. So if you hover over the map, little icons will show up in the county. So if you're looking for stories specifically in your county, it'll take you to a YouTube playlist of all the interviews that either have someone from your county or we talk about very specific things from your county. So hopefully that keeps growing as we keep having more guests. We're trying to get to Western Kansas. So if you have anyone from Western Kansas that would be willing to make the long drive to Salina, because that is where our studio is, we would absolutely love it.
When we're working on, being able to do some remote stuff
Yeah,
too, and
we are working on
lots
that,
of things behind the scenes going on. So we're super excited to try to get not just here in the center of the state, but all the corners too.
Yep.
So stay curious and spread the word.